Rocker Pat here. All right, guys, it is another hot rocking day in the jungle, and the sun is coming up on a beautiful Texas day and Sunday morning. And yeah, I'm surprised I don't have any loud rock and roll going on right now. What's up, Sketchy? You looking awful sketchy sitting over there. All right, guys, I have got some killer news on the boat front. Friday, I did a run with my friend Jen to deliver a motorhome, and we ended up, like, I don't know, all over Texas. Went to outside of San Antonio, then outside of Austin, then back to San Antonio, and then back to freaking Austin because we've got the wrong unit. And yeah, that was a long day. Anyway, so I'm sitting there in Seguin, Texas, and I get a text message from this guy, and it's a picture of a receipt, a credit card receipt from the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. So let's backtrack back to what I've been doing to try to solve this paperwork problem on the boat. So I started out with, I got the lien release from the lien company that had a lien on this boat. When I got that got me the name of the person who owned the boat. So with that piece of information, and I also had, it also came with the address of the guy that owned the boat. So now I actually have a name and an address to who owned this boat. So that started the little whole quest to see if I could find this guy. Well, last Friday, when I say last Friday, a week ago Friday, let's say, I drove down to Lamarck, Texas, which is like the next town from Galveston. And I went to the Texas Parks and Wildlife place there, and I got the paperwork I needed to do an abandoned title deal, abandoned boat bonded title kind of situation on this thing. And when I was there, the lady was like, well, why don't you just call this guy? And I like, well, I don't know how to get that, and I don't, blah, 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 right? So she grabs my phone, and she goes onto the Googler thingy, and she comes up with a deal, and I clicked on it, and I found a bunch of telephone numbers on this guy, David. So I came back to the shop, and I thought about it over the weekend, what I was going to do. On Monday of last week, which will be tomorrow week, and I got on the phone and I started calling all these numbers. Man, I went through every number and nothing was working. Everything was disconnected, this, that, and the other. So my insurance agent happens to be an ex-police officer. So I knew that he might have some way to do a little bit of research and everything. So I called him up, and what we found out was that there was, well, we found a David. I'm not going to use his last name. We found the guy with the same name, and ends up being that we thought at one time he was a rodeo bull rider kind of guy. And then we found because there was a guy with that name that had a ranch. And a bunch of pictures of him and, you know, doing a bunch of cowboy riding stuff. Then the next guy, we found that. And then we found that there was an investment company that was supposed to be owned by this guy. And so my thought process was, okay, well, maybe he bought the ranch because he had an investment place. And that's how he paid for the boats and all this other kind of stuff. Well, we had telephone numbers for the rancher guy, and I had telephone number for the investment place. So I called the rancher guy first, thinking that was where the guy would be. And the first person I talked to, he was like, no, I'm not that guy, and I've never owned a boat. And he was like upset that I called or whatever. He seemed like it. And so I apologized to him for bugging him and all this because I told him what my problem was and everything. Well, I didn't tell him a whole lot, but anyway, I hung up, and a few minutes later, he calls back. So he calls back, and he's like, well, how'd you get my number? And I tell him how I ended up with the police officer that I know that was able to find it and blah, blah, blah. And he goes, well, you know, this guy, somebody's always calling for, you know, every few years or whatever, looking for this guy and blah, 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 and everything. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bother you. And then he got really nice, and he started trying to help me figure out what I was looking for. And he told me about an ice creamery that was owned by the same family and this, that, and the other. And okay, because I'm like thinking there can't be a whole lot of people in Minnesota with this guy's name. So I hang up with that dude, and then I call over there to the investment place. And I talk to this guy named Gordon, and he goes, well, David has been dead for 7 years. I'm like, okay, well, that can't be the right guy. And then he was really nice and tried to help me figure out how to get in touch with this guy. And I was about to give up and just go ahead and fill out the paperwork and start the long, arduous process of getting a title for this boat. Because, man, I want to fix this thing so freaking bad. So bad. I mean, I'm sitting here looking at how am I going to paint this thing? Because there is a big paint job right there coming up. Anyway, so there was one telephone number left. One telephone number left. And I dialed it up, and when somebody picked it up, it was answered, but nobody said anything. And I was like, okay. And I said it while I was hanging up. I was like, well, that's kind of weird. Nobody said anything. Maybe we got a bad connection. Let me call back. So I called back a second time, and somebody answered, and it was the guy that owned the boat. And so I told him what the situation was, and he said he already knew what the situation was because of the fact that, you know, he had already talked to the guy at the finance company. So anyway, the guy with the boat is now on the phone with me. And I told him what the situation was, and I'm like, dude, I'm so sorry to have to ask you to help me, if you will help me and everything. And he goes, well, I'm never selling another boat again because this is the second time I've sold a boat. And years after I sold the boat, somebody's calling me up and asking me to do all the work. And I was like, you look, man, I will pay you if you will go get me the title to this boat and that trailer. And he was literally, I believe he was truthful that he would shoot a hole in the bottom of the boat before he sells the thing again. And yeah, so anyway, long story longer, I ended up talking to old boy for about 3.5 hours, man. Me and him just shooting the shit and everything. And he agreed to go get me the title. And that got us to Friday when I got a text message with a picture of him paying some money down there at the DNR. So it looks like we're going to get the paperwork for the big yellow boat so that we can get it rocking and a rolling. You guys got to understand, man, that not being able to work on this thing is, whoo, I'm ready to get them engines up out of there. So this is, speaking of the engines, he said that he had spent about 15 grand on this boat and had the engines redone. And he put the bigger camshafts in it, and each engine is supposed to be rated at 250 horsepower, and that's really pushing the limits on them alpha drives back there. But he said that's a 500 horsepower boat, and he's had it to 70 miles an hour. 70 on water. Hey, get me in that water. So, what do y'all think? Paint job, y'all look at some boat graphics, and we got to come up with something. Whoa! I ran into that, backing up. Anyway, we got to come up with some really badass graphics for that thing because that yellow's not working for me. I like mustard, but not on the side of my boat. All right, guys, well, that's what I got going on with the boat update, and I am just stoked that I'm going to get the paperwork on this thing, and I will save this rocking and a rolling and a rolling and a rocking boat. Talk to y'all next time.